Yo, yo, yo. Happy new week. Kids are psyched. Today, I just have a nice short podcast for you, a nice 20-minute one. A little different than the 2.5 hour normal ones I put out, but today I have Elijah Sharma. Elijah Sharma is a broadcast associate for Quibi at 60 Minutes. For those of you who don't know, Quibi was an up-and-coming mobile streaming service whose objective was to create big stories in only a couple of minutes. After losing traction and shutting down, Mr. Sharma stopped. Well, after Quibi lost traction and shut down, Mr. Sharma stopped working with Quibi and is now working at CBS News for 60 Minutes. I only had Mr. Sharma on for his lunch break, but I'm psyched that I got to talk to him, and I hope you enjoy this shorty podcast as well. Hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you on Thursday. Please welcome Elijah Sharma.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, skier.
Pretty good right now.
Welcome to Worlds.
I'm from Miami, Florida. Recently graduated from Syracuse University, class of 2019, and was a news associate at CNBC, where I worked on their digital team as an autos reporter and their breaking news team kind of on the assignment desk. And now I am broadcast associate at 60 and 6 for Quibi, now just 60 and 6.
Awesome. So you worked for CNBC after attending Syracuse University, or was it an internship while at Syracuse?
No, I interned there while I was at Syracuse University, but I worked there after graduation. I started in June, right after graduating in May.
Awesome. And so after attending Syracuse, you worked at CNBC, and then after CNBC, how did you end up getting the job at Quibi?
So I was really just kind of asking around and seeing what other jobs were out there. I was kind of happy at CNBC, but there were some things about the editorial that I wasn't entirely comfortable with, and I just kind of wanted to explore my options, really. One conversation led to another, and they said, hey, 60 Minutes is trying to put together this new team, and obviously any opportunity to work for 60 Minutes is just like kind of a gold standard network position. And they asked, do you want to be put up for it? And I said, of course. And 3 interviews later, here I am. But I was interviewing while I was working at CNBC, which was interesting.
Yeah, that sounds quite interesting. So just to clarify, you worked for Quibi, and then Quibi fell apart, and then you work for 60 Minutes right now. You were originally hired.
So technically I've always we were contracted by Quibi, but I've always been hired by CBS News and 60 Minutes. I was never a Quibi employee per se. I just created content for Quibi, but I am CBS staff.
Perfect. So your role at Quibi was 60 and 6, and that was basically 60 minutes in 6 minutes, correct? And you'd focus on one story per segment?
So we would put out one basically 6 to 9 minute piece every week. We used to be on Wednesdays, and then we moved to Mondays. Actually, no, it's a lie. We started on Mondays and then we moved to Wednesdays. But yeah, and again, Quibi kind of provided the production budget for us, but everything was taking place within kind of the CBS Broadcast Center. Quibi had no control over anything we did, except for basically telling us if our technical specs were off or if a video wasn't going to look good on the software. But they weren't really allowed to give us any editorial critiques.
Okay. So you worked for 60 and 6, and was the point of the show, did the original idea, was it to appeal to a younger generation with shorter attention spans that may have not been as interested in watching a full 60-minute show once a week?
Yeah, I think that was the initial idea, but it definitely kind of branched out into the idea that 60 Minutes needed a younger version of itself, and Quibi was kind of this new promising technology, and they said, hey, why not, stake our ground here? But yeah, there definitely was this idea that, okay, in 6 minutes we can still produce something that's like kind of long form, that's longer than kind of your average news package, that provides value, that we think can still live up to 60 Minutes name. So yeah, I would say that's kind of the way that it started. And then, excuse me, drop the fork. Excuse me. But after that, it really kind of turned into this idea of, okay, can we basically just push the boundaries of what 60 Minutes has meant, and kind of make it, what does a 21st century 60 Minutes look like, was, I guess, what it became. So yeah.
What was the biggest challenge about creating meaningful content, especially one like 60 Minutes has this obviously a huge legacy within the industry, and throughout the nation, people regard it as like one of the most like the best essentially journalist programs in the country. So with that legacy in mind, how did you go about creating meaningful content in 6 minutes that you felt lived up to that legacy and the standard and the quality that's been put forward in the past?
I mean, we tried to not sacrifice any of the journalism. I mean, anything we did was still just as reported out as a 60 Minutes broadcast would be. And I think the way that we tried to overcome a lot of those challenges is in the stories that we told. We told a story about a woman who fled an abusive relationship in the middle of a pandemic. We told a story about militias in Michigan preparing for what they feel is the second Civil War. We've told multiple stories about George Floyd and around issues like that. We've told 3 climate change stories. So I think it's really about just the subject matter. I think the subject matter is where you show where it matters. If you're telling important stories that maybe aren't being covered on places like TV or on places like YouTube, then I think you can really make the journalism matter from there. And I think people know when they're getting pandered to. And I think if we were to have just kind of gone at this and just been like, we're going to do kind of the standard millennial things, we'll do a gun control story, we'll do a climate change story, and so on and so forth, and just like really made it seem like we were trying to check boxes in terms of coverage, I think people would have noticed. And, you know, I mean, not for nothing, a lot of times this year has kind of dictated our coverage for us. I mean, it's been an impressively exciting year. Exciting is maybe not the right word, but it's been a newsy year. And a lot of times we've been just kind of trying to cover the stories of the year, along with anyone else, and put our own spin on them. So I think that's really how we've kind of dealt with it. In the beginning, though, it was kind of this idea of, okay, what does a 16:6 story look like? And we made kind of stories about fast cars and so on and so forth. And then the pandemic happened and we all got sick, and our coverage kind of did a 180.
So in making those stories, you talked about checking the boxes and how a lot of traditional millennial, like, I mean, there's a lot of quote unquote news outlets that are making news, things like that. But like you said, they're checking the boxes and pandering to audiences and making these clickbaity short content. How do you not do that? And how did you avoid checking those boxes, as you say? And making something more purposeful?
I think with us, it was, yeah. I think it's definitely kind of thinking about what the story is before you go in and do it. And also, I really think it has to do with the character. I think it has to do with the character, the level of access, and really looking at your story and saying, am I saying something that hasn't been said before or advances this conversation in any way? Because I think if you kind of look at the elements that you've reported out and been like, well, I kind of said the same thing as that NBC article and that Vox piece and so on and so forth, then it's like, okay, we need to keep digging and we need to find what our story is here, because right now we're just repeating other people's. And I think a lot of that comes down to just reporting. I think honestly, if you stare at something long enough or you pull at enough threads, something interesting falls out. I think that's been kind of the biggest thing I've learned when we've reported these stories, is that just you go a little deeper, you talk to a couple more people, and you find something like that. But again, I really do think it's the character, because I think people can connect with someone's story in a much more meaningful way than trying to connect to some abstract concept. Like, I could tell you that people are dying from the pandemic. It's another thing for me to interview someone who's breaking down on their couch about their relative who died from the pandemic. Like, I think it's about taking almost like I said, almost like a Wall Street Journal approach to storytelling, where you try to find someone who really illustrates a much larger problem and use them as a vehicle to tell your story, while also making sure you get in the rest of these facts and important stats. And really, I think for me, it's the rigorous fact checking that goes into these stories. I mean, every script is fact checked line by line with primary documents, stuff that was said during interviews from the transcripts with time codes. We really kind of meticulously make sure that we haven't changed the meaning of anyone's words, that we haven't misrepresented them, that any facts that we say are as accurate as we can verify. Yeah, it's just the idea that if you're watching the story, you're watching something that is fully vetted, fully put together, and that you can trust. And I think when something has that amount of work that's been put into it, it shows in the tone of the piece. And I think you can just tell. You can tell when people aren't taking leaps to connect something.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of that type of media these days where it's just easy to see that they're just doing this for money, honestly, and just for clicks. And it's cool to see that you guys are trying to make a bigger purpose and really, like you said, tell small stories to tell big ones, and to cater to people who are really interested in seeing something significant. So you talked about how telling the story and characters is your guys' biggest focus, and you really go more deep into that than other people. Do you feel like in the limiting, I don't know if limiting is the right word, but Quibi it's 60 and 6 minutes. Did you ever feel like you were sacrificing the story and potential like bits and pieces that may have been significant, but you couldn't show them or tell them because of how like the limiting nature of the platform of Quibi?
Yeah, no, I mean, there were definitely arguments over why are we cutting that? We should have this in there instead of that, and so on and so forth. I don't think that there was anything. I don't think we lost any of the meat and potatoes, truth be told, of anything that I remember being a part of. I think what really ends up happening is it's like a funny SOT or a kind of a nice B story, or a character that kind of, we like them, but they take too long to explain something that we could explain easier in track, or a stat that's not necessarily central to the story, but one of us got married to. I feel like that's usually the stuff that gets cut. Thankfully, we really haven't had too many painful cuts, at least not that I've been a part of. But there was definitely a time when we were kind of shooting more towards 8:30, 9 minutes a story. And they were like, hey guys, people are tuning out around like 7. So we got to start trimming these things down. And that led to some arguments in the screening room. But other than that, I mean, it's really honestly, 6 minutes is a long time. With regards to the malicious piece and stuff like that, those pieces were basically 9-10 minutes, because at that point Quibi had folded, and we were just going by the Kanye tweet, we have no managers, we cannot be managed, so 10-minute piece. And yeah, that's kind of where we're operating now. We're hoping that we can do more longer form stuff, kind of closer to a traditional broadcast in the future. But yeah, I mean, by the end of it, I was pretty comfortable making a 6-minute piece and knowing kind of the amount of B-roll, the amount of work, and kind of the back end of what that looked like, and being able to repeat that process by the end of it. But it's interesting because it's like not quite a news package, and it's not quite a traditional 60 minutes piece. So striking the tone between something that's more casual but also smart can get a little tricky in that amount of time.
As attention spans shorten, and like if you just look at the way platforms have been created, it went like YouTube and then Instagram, which is like YouTube is shorter than broadcast, and then Instagram's shorter than YouTube, and then now it's like TikTok, which is just like 2-second or like five, I don't know, I don't have TikTok, but like 6-second little beats. And do you think that as the attention span shorten and these stories become shorter, that what is to the point where we're going to start losing those meat and potatoes, like you said? And are you worried about that in the future, and that people will not like put in the time to watch these longer form stories that educate so much about people's situations?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely a concern when you see kind of attention span shrinking. But to that same point, I mean, people still watch documentaries, and those are hour-long movies. I think there's always going to be space for just taking a lot of time to tell a story, and a very specific story. And I think there's always going to be people that sign up for that. What I think's impressive about stuff like TikTok is the sheer amount of information that you can dispense in virtually no time. And the idea of being able to just narrowcast news that otherwise would have absolutely no home, because it's 7 seconds. You're not taking up anybody's space. You're stepping on anyone's toes on TikTok. And I think that idea is going to be kind of interesting moving forward. But I mean, I do worry about people just kind of skimming headlines or just watching now this videos with the subtitles on, and losing out on kind of longer form stories. But at the end of the day, I think if someone's interested in something, and if someone is trying to find a really, really knowledgeable story that helps them better understand the issue and maybe makes them go, huh, I think there's always going to be space for that. And I think that's a space that at least I personally would like to keep creating content for, because that's the kind of content that excites me.
In a young person, are you 25, 24, 25?
I'm actually 23.
Oh, 23. Okay, cool. So you're a younger person and you work at 60 Minutes, which is, if you look at just the interviewers and the people in general, it's an older generation of people. What do you feel like that? What do you feel that you've brought to the table as a younger person from a younger, more technological based generation to your job, and how have you contributed to 60 Minutes as a whole?
You know, I honestly think it's less the tech savvy. To their credit, I mean, these 60-year-old editors are really good at what they do. But I think it's really just kind of like a cultural understanding. It's not like tokenization or anything like that, but there's definitely this idea of like internet slang, or the language of the internet. I think that is maybe lost on people that are slightly older, that we know a little bit better, being more internet native. Because it's been like, for example, in the militia stories, like I knew how to work Reddit better than my 30-year-old producer did. And things like that. Like I know how to find stuff on the internet better. And that's become a really important part of journalism that I think is helpful for me moving forward. And then just like, you know, our generation has different priorities. We have a better beat on what people are thinking in kind of our demographic. And our demographic is like the all-powerful, ever-sought 23 to 50 demographic, which is what everyone wants to make content for. So I think it's been good in that I've been able to kind of push back or say like, no, actually, I think people talk about the story in this way, or this is how people do this, or no, you sound like an old person talking about something like this. It's basically, I keep people, I think I've been able to help keep teams from looking like the Steve Buscemi meme. And I think that's honestly been probably one of my biggest strengths.
Awesome. Do you have any final advice for people that may be our age or near our age that want to get into the career field that you are in right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the greatest advice that I can tell you is just to learn a language. It doesn't necessarily have to be like French or Spanish or anything like that. For example, the language of the internet. Just like have something that you can get access to / you have a knowledge base in, that's different from what other people would have / your general set of journalism skills, because it really, that's the kind of stuff that sets you apart from other people moving forward. and also just read and watch as much as you can, because those shots stay with you even subconsciously, and when you're moving forward or when you're thinking about how to put together a new story, you'll remember that. So yeah, just also it's fun. If you want to be a journalist, you just consume journalism. So yeah, I think that's the main thing. And never be afraid to reach out to anyone. The worst thing they say is no.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Sharma. I really appreciate your time, and I'd love to have you back on someday. Thank you so much for everything.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Max. Have a good one.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks. See you later.